Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. Hopefully my audio software will filter out the birds and crickets and everything else I got going around here. I thought the city was loud, but I guess spring, early summer in the burbs is just as loud in different ways. But anyway, let's jump in and see what we got. First up on Patreon, John Strom has a G-Comp versus G-SCART question. They plan to order either once pre-orders start, and they're debating if they should go SCART or component. They currently have their consoles connected to a Sony PVM via a Hydra SCART switch that works pretty well, with their only complaint being how easily the SCART connections become loose. They have both quality SCART and component cables for most consoles, so having to purchase new cables isn't much of a factor. If I were you, what would I do, G-Comp or G-SCART? So that's a really great question, because if you already have the cables and you already have a monitor that supports both, then where do you go from there? I would first look at any other factors in your setup that might affect this. Is anything else easier if you go component or SCART or anything else, or meaning any other equipment? Like, is there anything else that would have to change if you switched over? Also, what consoles are you using? Are you using mostly consoles that natively output RGB, and maybe you have a Wii that you want to throw in there as well, or something that's component? Or is it the opposite? Are you using mostly consoles that could natively output component video? So PlayStation 2, Wii, GameCube via the adapters and stuff like that. And then you just have a few RGB SCART consoles in there. If there's one that's, that's higher than the other, I would kind of just go with that, because while any conversion done correctly should be fine, HD RetroVision cables are amazing. Mike Cheese converters are great. The only thing is there's always a chance of something. So if you have a total setup that's all its own native signal from start to finish, there's just one less thing that could potentially go wrong at some point. Now, that might not exist for you. The setup that you have and the tools that you have might just work flawlessly with absolutely everything. So it just doesn't matter. And in which case, I would pick whatever switch comes in stock first. The GamesCare ones I've been using are great too. I don't think those are in stock either, though. I've never had a good luck with Hydras, though, so I understand why you would want to switch out from something like that. So I would first just say, what's the total setup? Is there anything that would make my life easier if I went with one or the other? And if not, then there you go. Then that's I would just pick whichever switch comes in stock first, or whatever you could find at a good price. But as far as signal quality goes, they're all the same. And in fact, I made a mistake a couple of times of thinking, I think it was PlayStation 2. I said I had better picture with RGB SCART cables, and it's because I didn't realize I was using knockoff component video cables. And I can't remember who it was. It was probably Steve from HD RetroVision was talking to me about his, and I used his, and all of a sudden it looked the same. So I actually cut the ends off of the older ones I had that looked thick and shielded, and they weren't. They just had a lot of foam in them, but they weren't actually shielded. And the actual conductors were super thin. You basically just bought a big thing of foam and rubber. So there really isn't actually a signal difference. I guess if you wanted to really dig down and nitpick, I'm sure we could find things. But for scenarios like we're talking about, it's all the same. So if you already have good cables for everything, you already have a good setup, I don't think it matters. But I would just kind of take a look and see if there's anything that could be made easier by one or the other. Next up, Steven Standers wants to know if I have any thoughts on Palmer Luckey's new Game Boy. He's talking a big game on screen resolution. So if everything is how he explains it is, it should be awesome. Now, you're paying a lot for it, but that's also relative, because if you get an original Game Boy and you want to pay somebody to do all of these extra mods, it's actually not that much. However, if you put it in context of how close in price it is to an analog pocket that gets you so much more, it is a lot. So it's really something that if what he's saying is true, you are actually getting a really high quality piece of equipment. So it just comes down to, how much do you love the Game Boy and Game Boy Color? Do you love them enough to buy a dedicated console for them? Or do you love them as much as everything else that you could use on a pocket? And that's something that's going to have to be totally up to you. I don't know anything about the guy. A lot of people I've heard a lot of bad things, but it's also popular to dogpile on people these days. So I don't really know if any of it's true or care. I just don't care. I'm sorry if that offends people, but this person does not affect my life in any way, and I just don't care. But the one thing that did really rub me the wrong way is apparently he had Logan Paul, a really popular and really wealthy celebrity, show up and won a Tetris tournament at an expo last weekend. So you have somebody that already has a ton of attention, taking the attention away from a whole bunch of people that are looking to gain it. And you have somebody that already has a whole lot of money trying to go in there and take all of the attention, meaning that the other people who are looking to promote things aren't getting talked about as much. So I don't understand why that would happen. That was really off-putting. To me, if you wanted to test your product, you would just leave it in the hands of the experts. And let's just say Logan Paul loves Tetris and is genuinely amazing at it. That's great. I would love to have more of the exposure in the scene, and that's all awesome. But don't do it in a way where you show up and steal the attention. It would cost them zero extra effort or money to have done that in a way that it could have enhanced everybody. You could have blown up the other players, you could have blown up the vendors, you could have blown up the expo, everything, but it was really just a I'm stealing the limelight kind of way. Now, I wasn't there, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I am just speaking based on what I read and what I saw scrolling through social media, which, as we all know, could all be lies anyway. I don't know, but it really rubbed me the wrong way that he would do something like that. And if I was at that expo, I would have started booing because I'm an asshole sometimes. You don't have to like me. It's fine. You could still appreciate the work that I do and think I'm an asshole. But to see somebody like that who has all of that money and attention every day just by firing up their phone, steal that from other people, why would you need to do that? If your product could stand on its own, why do you need that? So that rubbed me the wrong way. It could just be that they're all a bunch of douchebags and they love doing stuff like this and happen to also make an amazing product. That's fine. We all know Voltar. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That fell out. But from a hardware point of view, it seems like if it holds up to everything they're saying, it's going to be an awesome option. I'm going to stop talking now before I get myself in trouble. Next up, Josh Miller is trying to build a consoleized Virtual Boy using Vertex Virtual Tap, the video outboard, and they're also going to be wiring a Nintendo multi-out to it. So I'm assuming you're going to have it in RGB S240p configuration, not the VGA configuration. And they're wondering about wiring the multi-tap in voltage. And I'm a little confused about the question. My apologies if I'm getting this wrong. I'm still not fully recovered and I'm a little out of it here. So please pardon me if I'm totally getting this wrong, but according to your question and the instructions that you found, you need to wire the virtual tap with 3.3 volts. However, if you're following the wiring diagram for the Nintendo multi-out, that only shows 5 volts. There is no 3.3 volt. So I don't think that you would need voltage on the multi-out unless you're very specifically going to a SCART CRT, consumer CRT, so like a PAL CRT, because voltage on those multi-outs were for things like sending voltage to your TV to say, hey, it's an RGB mode and it's 4x3, not 16x9 or something like that. And it could be used for other stuff, like if you're using an HD RetroVision cable to go from RGB to component, that is going to require 5 volts. But if you're using an RGB SCART cable, then you don't need voltage at all unless your target display needs it. And in fact, if you're using a switch that provides power for you, then you don't need it at all, because then you could just plug your RGBS and audio SCART cable into it with no voltage, and then just the switch itself will provide voltage on the output side. So I don't think you're going to need to worry about voltage on the multi-out unless you're specifically in that scenario. And you definitely don't want to wire the virtual tap directly to the multi-out, because then you would have two sources pulling from the same thing if you did plug it in anywhere else. You want to wire the virtual tap's power somewhere on the Virtual Boy's motherboard. So please let me know if I'm misunderstanding. Just definitely check around. There's a bunch of people who have done the mod before. I think Ben Fong posted a ton of pictures online when he did his. You might want to check out his Twitter page or something like that. I think he posts under iFixRetro, and just kind of check it out and see. But I think I think I got you pointed in the right direction, but if I completely misunderstood, just DM me or re-ask next week and I'll try to get it right. Next up, Weijlo said they recently acquired a Japanese PlayStation 2 that has a PCMCIA slot instead of the expansion port. One of the tools they coincidentally had in their toolbox was a SanDisk PCMCIA memory card reader. Am I aware of how I might get that to work as a storage drive? They checked the wiki and it was pretty light on details. No, I didn't. I've never even seen one of those before, and I wasn't really aware that you could use those for anything. But I don't think it would hurt if you just tried it. So maybe take your memory card reader, take whatever storage you have that fits in that, put it in your computer, and format it PS2 hard drive style, the exact same way you would with anything else, using, I think it's WinHTTP or something like that. I forgot what the software was, but it's the same exact thing that you would use to format and add games to a standard hard drive. I would just give it a try. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? If it's a PCMCIA slot, then it's not going to blow anything out. It should just adhere to the same standards. I guess I would, if you really cared about your memory card reader and the memory card in there, maybe be careful, but I can't imagine it would do any damage to the PlayStation 2. Please, please, please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. If I am, I'll reach out directly to Weijlo, but I can't imagine if it's an actual PCMCIA slot that it would be wired any differently. So the worst thing that would happen is nothing. But I also think that if it was as easy as I made it, why wouldn't somebody have done a video on it already or something like that? So I'm going to be totally useless to you on this one, but if I were in your position, unless some of this stuff was very expensive or very special to me, I would just give it a try and just to see what would happen. But please do that at your own risk, because I genuinely have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm only guessing. I don't know nothing about those, but if you end up trying, please let us know what happened. I think that'd be pretty neat. Next up, Adam Brady had a very lengthy question about downscaling. I read every word of it, but just in the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to skip to the answers to your question. So first, Adam's trying to downscale video to a PAL consumer CRT with RGB SCART. This is not specifically for gaming, but mostly to downscale HDMI video to a CRT and output the highest quality possible RGB video. But it's also nice to have options in the future if anything changes. So they purchased an Extron VSC 700D, and then also got a Corio 2 TV1. The Extron VSC 700s basically all worked out. They just got an HDMI to component converter to go into that, and then for the output, they contacted Retro Gaming Cables, and they were able to make a custom BNC to SCART cable that had the power signal built in, probably via an external USB connection or something like that, so that you could plug it into a PAL TV and have it auto switch to RGB mode, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. So that seems like the perfect solution. And everything is worked out. Jan from Consoles for You is going to be selling the SCART Sense Inject, which is essentially a SCART to SCART adapter that lets you plug USB in just to send voltage to your TV. That's not out yet, and the cable that you're talking about is already perfect, so I would leave that alone. However, on the Corio TV1 side, you have a lot of questions about DVI, but I think you need to first determine, are you outputting DVI digital or DVI analog? And because DVI digital is essentially, for what we're talking about, the same as HDMI. There are some differences. You might not get audio through it. So if that was the case, then you would want to plug HDMI, or you would want to get some kind of HDMI audio extraction at some point. Or if your source has two outputs, that's also an easy way to take care of that. But I don't really have any experience. I didn't like the Corio 2s at all when I borrowed one to use it. I just found it cumbersome and not intuitive, and every other downscaling solution I tried worked better, basically. Marco's videos are my most in-depth experience with it, and Marco seemed to have a lot better luck than I did. But I don't know if I would really obsess over that one when you already have a good solution. Now, if you already own it, you want to utilize it, sure, but you have to break down what the signals are going in and out and what you actually need, because you linked to a lot of adapters and a lot of converters that plug into each other that might not be necessary at all. So you have to just get your signal into that Corio 2 box with whatever it is that it requires. So if it takes component video, cool. If it's VGA, just get an HDMI to VGA converter. All that should be fine. And on the output side of things, if you just take whatever signal you have and convert it the same way. So if it outputs HDMI, you would need an HDMI to component video converter. If it outputs DVI digital, then you would essentially just need the same thing. You would just need to get a DVI to HDMI cable, because all you're doing is passing the same digital signal through. There's no conversion. The only quote unquote conversion is the connectors on the end of it. If it's outputting DVI analog, that's essentially a VGA cable. It's just with a different end on it. So then you would only need a DVI to VGA cable, not converter. And then from that point, sure, you could use the HD15 to SCART, but then you would have the same blanking problem. So you would probably need to get another custom cable from Rob that's the same thing, just instead of BNC, it would be VGA to SCART with that, the probably USB voltage injected into the SCART head to change things over. So you're just going to need to double check all of that stuff. Once again, I barely have any hands-on experience with the Choreos, and I would tell you to go check out Marco's videos anyway. But it's just very easy in all of retro anything to mistake connectors for signals. And it's just like how SCART could also pass composite video, or technically even component video, or even a bunch of other stuff. It doesn't really, the head itself doesn't really matter. And same thing with VGA. How many times have we used that quote unquote VGA, the D sub connector, to pass many different signals, including just things like 1200 by 1024 or something, or 1024 by 768, or any of those. Technically, those are not VGA voltages, VGA video signals. VGA is technically 640 by 480. So all of these terms and connectors can get incredibly confusing, but all that really matters is what signals are coming out of those connectors. So I would just go back and double check all of this stuff and kind of relook your whole setup, double check what Rob can get you, and this might be a very easy solution for you. So go back through and see what you need. Let me know. I could follow up again next week, and it sounds like you're going to have an awesome way to downscale a couple of things. The only other thing I would also really suggest is picking up one of those cheap Amazon boxes, just as a sanity check, because they're not going to be nearly as good as those two solutions. However, you're going to be able to just plug your stuff in and it works. So the aspect ratio might be off, the quality's not going to be as good, but now you at least have something where you could go, okay, it's working via composite video via this cheap Amazon box. So that means something else in the chain is off. Or depending on your needs, it might just be perfect and you could sell the Choreo. It's totally up to you. There's a million choices here, but I would definitely just take a step back and go and double check the signal types out of all of these things and go from there. And, let me know where you're at with it. Next up, Dustin Madison wants to know if I have any suggestions of what to bring to a retro game convention when it comes to just the basics. Other than, change of clothes and money, they're oblivious to if they need to prepare anything for security or if they need to be ready for things that regulars at cons or expos know to get from the get-go. Deodorant. Now, I'm only half kidding, but for some reason, some people just don't put on deodorant and don't shower before coming. Too many games was the worst. A couple of people made comments to me before I went to that, and I was like, what are you talking about? I go to cons all the time, and they don't. And I walked into that room, and as soon as you walk in, it was like one giant Smash tournament. I could not believe the smell in that place, and I just don't get it. I've been fat my whole life, and I never smelled like that. Maybe if you catch me right out of the gym or right after I was done mowing the lawn or something like that, but I don't get it. And if I'm offending somebody here, good, put some deodorant on. And if you can't afford deodorant, buy deodorant instead of the ticket to the convention. Holy crap. Obviously there are people with glandular issues and other things, but I was friends with a few people that had those issues growing up, and they all figured some way out to make them not smell horrifically offensive to everybody around them. So Dustin, I'm not accusing you of smelling. I'm just saying, if anybody in general is asking what to bring to a con, put on deodorant and, maybe bring a mask just in case other people smell so bad you want to hide in your own breath rather than smell them. But that's not every convention. That was too many games was the absolute worst one for me. But most of them are just fine. So my wise ass but very accurate comments aside, bring cash just in case. Cash goes a long way over credit cards because there's just a lot less to deal with, even PayPal and stuff like that. So that way, if you see something and it's like, hey, I know this is $100, but I got cash on me, what could you do? Very often that's a good way for people to not even bargain, because I'm not a bargainer. I don't like that. I didn't grow up around a bunch of bargainers. So to me, I just get offended when people try to pay me less for things. But I'm never shy just saying, hey, is the price same for cash? Because if the answer is yes, then that's cool. There's no conversation. And if they're like, no, actually, then that's on them. That's not on me. So that's just my personal opinion, though. You feel free to bargain up if you want to. A lot of people really enjoy that part of things. But that's really it. I mean, your cell phone has a camera in it because there's always cool stuff that you want to take pictures of. I could suggest maybe bringing something that you wanted to sell or trade, but just remember that you're then going to have to lug that thing around with you all day long. So if you're bringing a bunch of, just loose Game Boy games that you're looking to trade or sell, cool. But if you're bringing a Philips CDI 220, I don't know if I would wander around with that all day at a convention. It'd be funny if you did, but whatever. So no, I mean, it's a great question. I just would, it's just kind of like every other live event, right? You're probably not going to be allowed to bring food or drink in, just like most other places. And, don't bring weapons. And if you're going to dress up in cosplay, that's the only time you would really have to worry about security, because if you bring, a cosplay outfit that looks like it's sharp or has metal pieces on it, you're going to get checked because they don't want you to cut little kids that run by, which is totally fair. But if you have a fun plastic outfit with a, like a blow up inflatable sword, they're probably not even going to say anything. They're probably just going to say, come right through. So yeah, I don't know. That's basically it. But once again, Dustin, I'm not saying anything to you personally. If anybody says, what do I do before I go to a con? It's shower and put on deodorant, just because of that one experience I had in basically every Smash tournament I've ever been to. I just don't understand that either. But you know what? Maybe I'm just old and don't get it. But at least I'm old and smell good. Next up, Tim the Gamer 23 said they've been reading more about the Sony encoders in old Sega Genesis consoles, and it turns out they developed a CXA2075, which was meant to be a drop-in replacement for the CXA1645, but it was never used for some reason. Do I know if anyone has successfully swapped that out into a Genesis or basically any console with a 1645? It supposedly produces much better video output, but they haven't found enough about it online. So, no, I don't know specifically anybody that's done that. And if I do, I completely forgot. But if I did and forgot, the reason would be because it didn't make that much of a difference for RGB. And in fact, when you reroute a lot of these signals through the modern THS 7374 amps and stuff like that, you definitely get a better signal. However, one of the questions I always had is how much of that signal improvement is because it's a more modern, quote unquote, modern amp, or how much of that is because you've moved the signal away from the motherboard, away from other traces and noise that it's being picked up. And one of the tests that we did with the Super Nintendo showed that the 7374 barely produced a better image than the original one when you rerouted the RGB lines off of the motherboard. So it could very well be that you're not going to get any noticeable RGB improvement over anything like any of the other solutions right now, because even if the amp itself is good, you're still getting stuff on the motherboard that's going to create interference. That said, it's possible it does a better job for composite video. And those are tests that I haven't done too much on because I only use composite video on CRTs. CRTs are so much more forgiving with composite video signals than everything else. And it just never really mattered that much to me because, yes, you could definitely see the difference between a crap composite video signal and a really good composite signal. But it's also, if you've decided to go composite, especially if you have the ability to do RGB in any way, it's just something you want to embrace. You just want to say, hey, this is how we used to play it back in the day. Let's not even worry about quality. And, if we're going to play it this way type of thing. So those are just my opinions. I guess I don't really have any facts for you in this other than the rerouting of the signal thing. But It's a great question. If anybody's done it, it would be awesome if you posted in the comments and let us know if there's a noticeable difference. But I can guarantee you're not going to do something like swap that out in a Model 2 that's kind of noisy and get perfect video out of it or something like that, or a 32X that's noisy. You're not going to swap out that 1645 with a 2075 and suddenly there's going to be no more noise on it. Definitely not, because you still have the noise from the Genesis. You still have the weird 32X stuff going on. It's a great question though. So I love stuff like this. And these are the type of nerd questions that used to keep me up at night when I first started RetroRGB, looking to see what else we could do to these consoles. Next up, PS3 Inquisition recently picked up an Intellivision from a yard sale. They connected it to their CRT with an NES RF switch, and the picture is terrible, completely unplayable. They did some searching online and found a few people saying to never use the NES RF switch, and found a few recommendations to buy an RCA to coax adapter and run shielded coax to the TV. They've never heard of doing this, so they were wondering if I had any suggestions or know why the NES switch would work so poorly with the Intellivision. I am going to answer your question, but I'm also going to say that I answered it in great detail in a video I did last year, and I really suggest watching that one. And I knew that when the video had RF in the title, I would lose a lot of RGB fans, but I tried to throw a lot of fun, weirdy, deep dive nerd stuff in there just to make it worth your time. But all of that stuff is answered in detail. But here's the short version. Those RF adapters are all technically RF switches. And what the NES adapter does versus the much older ones with the physical switch on the side is it does it automatically. Same with the SNES, Master System, Genesis. So when it senses the signal coming from the console, it shuts off the signal coming from your old antenna or cable box and sent that instead. But the components in these things age just like all other components. And since you don't have an analog cable TV antenna sending signal to your CRT anymore, all you really need to do is get the signal from the console direct into your CRT. And yes, a shielded coax cable, so basically an RF cable would work, but like I showed in the video, a shielded RCA cable and a little adapter would work just as well. And there were, of course, many actuallys in the comments about that, but it's all, I guarantee any of the actuallys never actually tested it the way I did. So plugging it directly into your CRT with shielded cables is definitely a good thing. And the shielding is important, especially important with RF, because RF is essentially broadcasting an analog video signal over a cable. So it will absorb any interference around it. But as long as you're using everything fully shielded, it should be totally fine. So I'll leave a link to that video. Hopefully you enjoy it. Watch it to the end, because there's a lot of fun nerd stuff in there that if you're a member of this Patreon, you're at least partially as nerdy as I am. So hopefully you'll get a chuckle at some of the weird deep dive stuff that I did. Last up is a question from Tony Shadwick that dips a bit into drama, and Tony's question is completely valid, and I want to make sure that everybody knows to feel free to always ask any question that you would like. Don't ever feel bad asking. Don't feel like I'm going to lash out. The worst thing that could happen is if it's a question I don't want to answer publicly, I would answer privately and just ask that you delete the question so I don't have to deal with any drama publicly. However, I want to answer this question, both because it's valid and Tony is not being the drama person here, but because the answer has one fact that I really want everybody to know. So no drama, facts only. The question was, what's up with all the drama around the Mars project? Some people call it vaporware and a money grab. And that last thing is why I really felt the need to address this. So here is the fact that you need to know. The Mars team has not taken one penny from any customer. If somebody tells you they have, they're lying to you, probably on purpose. And that is the number one fact that you need to know. You can't call something a money grab if they haven't taken your money yet. So you're welcome to form whatever opinions you want. I don't want to get involved because I support every great idea. I support every good team of people that are trying to make something cool. I know a bunch of the people that are involved in that are trying their best. So I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it's going to release and be amazing. Maybe it's not going to release. I don't know. All I know is they haven't taken your money and they're trying to make an awesome product. So any opinion that you want to have about it, cool. Just keep that one fact in mind when you're forming those opinions, because it is way different to announce a product, take a bunch of people's money, and then have a product delay than it is to announce a product and just have a product delay. Those are two completely different scenarios. Maybe that's just an opinion, but it's a very strong opinion of mine. So that's really it. I haven't taken anybody's money. Tony, your question's valid. Keep them coming. Don't ever feel bad to ask a question. Sorry, I hope I'm not singling you out or anything. It was a good question, but yeah, that's basically it. So, and that's all I'm really getting involved in, because I have so much better things to do than deal with drama. Well, that's it for this time. All the questions this week were on Patreon, which happens quite often because that's just where the majority of people support. But anybody who supports on any of those services, feel free to ask any question you want. Just please do so in the latest Q&A post, wherever it is that you support. The way all of the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. And besides, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through in real time and answering it as if we were hanging out somewhere together, standing at a booth at an expo, chilling at a coffee shop, at a bar, whatever. I like these to be very laid back, and I try my best to get my facts right, but I'm only human, and I'm doing these conversation style. So if I make any mistakes, always feel free to let me know, but ask any question you want. And as always, thank you so much to anybody who supports in any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff alive. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.